great. Can we switch to Ukraine? Because this seems to be unlike Manny Pacquiao. He seems to be using his notoriety as a boxer, and maybe it's just because I'm on Ukraine's side, because I believe they are a country and they should be independent. Can you tell us more history and how he became this mayor of Kiev?
So Vitali Klitschko is actually one of those people that I have not had the chance to write about so far. And it surprises me to this day, like I keep thinking about it from time to time, is that he's quietly been the mayor of Kiev for a while through a lot of this, conflict, the annexation of Crimea onwards, to the Donbass war, to all sorts of things that have been happening. And he's quietly been the mayor of Kiev through a very, very interesting period in Ukrainian history. So I think that's a vulnerability on my part in terms of like a blind spot for me in terms of coverage that's lacking that I need to make up for soon. So you'll be seeing something more significant on Klitschko in the future, especially on his rise to power, which I find to be quite significant and quite interesting, really. But again, it's more of that popularity of being a boxer. Now he rode the wave of this, one of the greatest of all time again, quite similar to Manny Pacquiao, and rose to become a mayor of Kiev. But the difference is that I could be wrong here, but I don't believe that the Klitschko brothers emerged from poverty. I mean, these are highly intellectual human beings, both very, very well educated, extremely talented boxers, and I don't think they were struggling for money at any point. But stuff like that doesn't necessarily factor in Russia. When I come to think of a lot of the athletes and a lot of the significant figures that there are right now, not everyone is emerging from poverty in Russia. It doesn't really factor in. It comes down to your machismo, how you present, and combat sports really plays a massive role when it comes to either Russia or Ukraine, or this whole, post-Soviet bloc almost. You find that those were the kinds of athletes and sportsmen that they were really into. These more masculine ones, let's say, Greco and amateur wrestling of any kind, and Roman wrestling, that kind of stuff. And boxers, of course, and MMA came much later. Football, of course, factored in, but to an extent, Klitschko represented a lot of these things, these ideals that Ukrainians enjoyed: a love for one's country, extremely intelligent, and at the same time, this humongous specimen of a human being who was actually an incredible fighter in his day. So his rise to power doesn't surprise me in the slightest. What's going on right now, I think, is really interesting, because there's layers and layers to the story in Ukraine. So first of all, Ukraine is struggling with a dictator, not in their own country, but in the neighboring country of Russia. Now, Putin is, I'm going to struggle to say this in a way that doesn't sound complimentary to him, because I really cannot stand Putin, but amongst all the dictators and authoritarian leaders in this world, he is by far the craftiest, the most intelligent, and the most dangerous of them all. There's no doubt about that. I've had the pleasure and the privilege to speak to on air multiple times with former world champion Garry Kasparov, and this is a statement that he relayed time and time again, and it eventually really truly made sense. As I've come to cover so many dictators, there are very few with the intelligence and the longevity of Vladimir Putin. And that speaks to something, and that shows you the pressure that a country like Ukraine is under right now. Look at how the annexation of Crimea happened, and look at what little was done about it around the world. Nobody touches Putin at the end of the day. They say they can't stand him. They'll sanction Russia. They'll do this and that. And yet somehow Russia makes it through. I'll never forget when I arrived in Russia the first time in 2014, I arrived on a day called Black Tuesday, and it was Black Tuesday because of a massive recession that had just hit Russia. This is December of 2014. And so, 2014 is also when the Crimea happened and all sorts of big things happened at the time. And I arrived on this Black Tuesday, and the country was just in collapse. Like, we're talking about lineups everywhere. People were just trying to buy furniture before the currency completely collapsed. They're just trying to spend their savings on anything other than the currency that they had. And it was a horrible time for Russia. And I remember reading Western outlets, and it was glee from all these outlets about, look, well, this is what Putin gets for, this. We're going to place sanctions on him because of this is what he deserves. But you're affecting a country as well. And Putin ends up coming out of this even stronger. He did. He emerged from this quite strong in the end, and he's still there. That's the unfortunate thing. And the only people who suffered were the citizens. Now, the same thing happens in Ukraine. And Ukraine, on the other hand, unfortunately, has had to radicalize is the wrong word here, but it has pushed itself in a direction of nationalism and ultranationalism that is extremely concerning. Truly, truly very concerning. Like, we're talking about some of their elite paramilitary units are complete neo-Nazis. Like the Azov battalion are neo-Nazis. Neo-Nazis, by the way, that were trained by the FBI and the CIA. That's who funded them for quite some time. So when we talk about who likes to fund who and what kind of company the United States keeps, it's not democratic company, that's for sure. So Ukraine has really gone through a lot. I'm going to keep getting sidetracked here if I don't just focus on this. So yeah, so one of the people we saw, and the person who emerged as their president eventually was Zelensky. I believe his name is Volodymyr Zelensky, and at first he seemed like a reasonable leader, but he's slowly gotten a lot more concerning with his policies and his approach to Russia and his challenging of Russia. It's almost as if his own presidency now relies on this showmanship going back and forth between Russia and Ukraine. And at the same time, at radicalizing and nationalizing his country behind him and extremely anti-Russia. Don't get me wrong, they deserve to dislike Russia, but it's now being weaponized against the Ukrainian people by this president. One of the things he's actually done is create this rivalry with Klitschko. They are not on the same side. They're not even in the same political party, as far as I understand. They are, and Klitschko was not even the person who started this rivalry, but Zelensky actually, from the very first time, from as soon as he set foot in office for his first term, knew that his future opponent was probably going to be Klitschko, and that he was a truly formidable opponent. So he has spent the last few years causing all sorts of trouble for Kiev. Like truly, there's been a strange back and forth between them over the past few years. It went quiet for a little while, but he keeps bringing up all these different corruption scandals in Kiev going on. Klitschko then goes and blames them on Zelensky, saying that this is a political ploy, and that this is just political pandering and tactics going on. So there is massive internal conflict and internal politics going on in Ukraine. Then there's the element of geopolitics, and there's just the festering of ultranationalism happening in the country as well. So when we talk about Ukraine, Klitschko does not represent everything that is happening. He's one clog in this really rusting machine that exists in Ukraine right now.
And what's going with the buildup of Russian troops? I see that they're seeing this collapse and this I'm going to call it a mess of what's going on with the infighting of Ukraine. Because is that what they're trying to take of? Because I've heard in the last few weeks, it's just more troops and more troops. I believe, the U.S. is doing our diplomatic threatening of sanctions, which I think Russia's just like, look, that does nothing. We know that.
I didn't know there was anyone left to sanction in Russia anyway.
I know.
I thought they got everybody. What's left?
What I know. And so so it's interesting that Klitschko, because there is a Times, I really wanted to read it. I couldn't get through the paywall on the Sunday Times, where they did this long profile. And the headline is something about like Klitschko is ready to defend his city. Mm-hmm. So it almost, what you're describing, like Klitschko using, that he is power, I'm a tough guy. I can battle people. Is he almost trying to do a power maneuver with Zelensky?
Yeah, Zelensky.
Zelensky.
At this point? Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, because I heard that maybe he had been offered to be the president of Ukraine or the leader, but he turned it down. I guess I'm wondering, what is Klitschko? What is his end game?
I think I had seen Klitschko just a few weeks ago mention that he came out publicly saying that he had never announced that he was running for president, and he doesn't know where all this talk is coming from. Again, this all sounds like, politics at play. So I can't quote this as fact at all, but I think that's his most recent statement. But the idea that he's coming out with this, very courageous, I will defend Ukraine, etc., I will defend my city of Kiev, I think that's, is part of, and just the result and the consequences of what's happening in Ukraine right now. Well, you have people who are frightened, and when people are scared and desperate, it never leads to progressiveness. Let's just say that, unfortunately. It does lead you down a very difficult path, a nationalistic path, and that's kind of what's happening in Ukraine right now. And that's what's happening on a smaller scale in Kiev, which is a much more open city generally. And Klitschko, I never got the sense And again, I have not studied him the way I have a lot of other dictators, so I could be wrong here. But I really never got the sense that he was an authoritarian or he was pushing for that kind of approach, or even as a strongman leader, truly. And I could be very wrong here, but that was never the impression I got. But I can see and I can sense a shift in his approach now, if only to survive. At this point, if everybody around you is radicalizing, is slowly leaning a little more to the right, well, then your job is to sink or swim at that point. You have no other choice. You can't go the other way. You can't say, well, I don't really think anything's going to happen. If you're asked a question like that, a tough question like that, you got to give the tough answer. And I'm not defending him in any way. I'm just trying to state what I think is going on at this point. So he's in a very tough position. He might actually want to simply do his job and approach and help Kiev seize all these different problems. We're talking about an intelligent human being as well, not somebody who's coming out of nowhere saying he's better than everyone else. Truly someone who came and wanted to work through the system. Maybe this is what's happening right now is not at all what he signed up for. And unfortunately, this is now the game that he has to play.
And then just to ask your opinion, Karim, because we saw Crimea just be taken over and I don't even know what kind of backlash they had politically with other countries. I'm sure that there were some sanctions again. Do you think that Putin might want to try and take Ukraine? Or is it just a ploy?
That's a difficult question, but I would at this stage right now, I would say no. I would say that would not be a smart. I'd say Russia, as much as Putin has survived, and as much as we talked about his longevity and his intelligence, as much as he is at a very strange time in his tenure as president of Russia, he does not have much longer to go, and he knows this. I mean, he can continue extending his time, sure, but he's aged. He's nearly 70. He's past his time, and the only reason he's still sticking around is because he's not 100% sure what's going to happen to him if he leaves right now. There's a massive vacuum there, and there are plenty of oligarchs that he has upset over the years. At the same time, Russia is dealing with a very difficult time, and there have been plenty of protests asking for his removal, more than anything in the first 15 years of his presidency. So we are seeing a shift in Russian mentality. We are seeing them falling into more and more poverty and a more difficult political and economic environment, and a new generation that simply can't stand him. I think that's a trifecta situation that says, no, let's not go to war. I don't see how war in this case unites his people when, for me, I was in Russia a lot in the immediate aftermath of this newfound rivalry between Russia and Ukraine at the time, and the annexation of Crimea, etc. And I spoke to a lot of Russians, and a lot of Russians who have family in Ukraine who go back and forth all the time, and they're like, we don't understand what the hell's going on. While others were talking about how suddenly rampant the nationalism was and how just vilified, like people were being just, oh, you're from Ukraine, well, screw you, we'll screw you. Well, it was very strange. And I spoke to a lot of people who were very confused at the time. And Putin could want to play up on that, but I don't think he's in a position to go to war with a country like Ukraine. I don't think so. I don't think, and let's be fair here, I don't think there's a winner in a situation like this. No. There's never a winner in war, and there's definitely not going to be a winner in a situation like this.
No, would you say, oh, excuse me, Nancy.
Oh,
sorry.
Please.
Would you say that the threat of war is what, keeping them on their toes and kind of trying to maintain a nationalism, like to consolidate his power is what's going on then?
I think the threat of war works for both sides in that case, because Zelensky gets to consolidate his power as well by saying, okay, well, we look at what Russia's doing to us. You need me. You need what I'm creating in this country for us to be protected, to be safe. I'm here to keep you safe. This is what we have to do. Russia is our enemy. And pushing that kind of, talking points, those kind of talking points through. While Putin will do the exact same thing, saying, I'm strengthening our country. Look at me strengthen our borders. Because Putin, if there's anything he loves, is weaponizing not the borders of actual Russia, but using the countries surrounding Russia as these proxy states that protect Russia as well, so that nobody can really come after Russia. That's been a mentality. I think this is a mentality he picked up from, Catherine the Great hundreds of years ago, and how she created the Russian Empire. And Putin has stuck to it. There's a reason he wants to maintain the Caucasus. He sees it as the gateway to Europe. You lose the Caucasus, and Russia becomes a lot more vulnerable. So as much as the North Caucasus, for instance, bring him so much grief, and over the years, I mean, we're talking about some of the hardest days of his presidency, included those 2 wars with Chechnya, and the casualties were through the roof. Nobody was happy in that situation. What he did to Chechnya was horrific. Truly, what the people of Chechnya have gone through, very few people in this world can ever understand. And we're talking people who are my age. They are traumatized beyond repair at this point. And that's Putin's doing. That's Putin's doing. That's nobody else's doing but Putin's. Yet he does that because he believes in how he protects his borders. He believes in these proxy states. They're nothing to him but border walls. Instead of creating borders actually made of cement like Israel does around Gaza, he actually just uses the human beings and the land and the mountains as his border.
And so the biggest threat to that kind of power that's not war, and that's not the threat of war, you were talking about the younger generation in Russia right now. You think that's going to be like, if anything can pull people out of that mentality? Is there a possibility that that younger generation will just find their own cult sports figure to kind of fixate around? I mean, it seems like the best way to, well, it seems like the most obvious way to fight authority is by fighting it, right? And so by instilling your own figurehead or your own, Putin. I forgot the question I'm asking, except that, like, is there a possibility, is there a danger of that happening?
Julie, I think what you were asking is that could Fedor come in?
No, not Fedor, please.
Well, Fedor's worked for Putin. Fedor's actually done like propagated Putin's policies in the past when Putin was running for president. I cannot remember when it was, but it maybe was a decade ago now. I mean, he used Fedor. Like Fedor came out and gave like political speeches in favor of Putin.
It's interesting because when you were saying earlier about the athlete or the kind of the faith in the athlete, the sports combat figure, I mean, Sambo and Putin are kind of so interchanged in kind of that mythology. Maybe that's
same with judo.
Yeah, that's kind of the perspective, the lens I've had of that. But then Fedor is the big dude that he can also use as, hey, I might seem small in demeanor, but I've got this power, this kind of quiet control. And here's a big dude who also does my bidding. I've derailed it. I'm so sorry.
Well, there was the time he brought in Steven Seagal to act like his bodyguard. Who brings in Steven Seagal to act as his bodyguard? But yet this incredibly intelligent dictator somehow did. And he thought it worked in his favor somehow. But then again, Lukashenko also brought in Steven Seagal, and you just see Steven Seagal standing there. Lukashenko literally digs out a carrot from his garden, hands it to Steven Seagal, and Steven Seagal just starts eating it. That's the whole clip. That's the whole clip. And I don't understand these people. I don't understand them sometimes. Like, I feel like the line between absurdity and reality is blending so much that I'm losing my footing in this world sometimes. Like, it's incredible.
No, I mean, yes. I mean, we had Donald Trump as president, and and we had Tito Ortiz. We could talk about his.
Oh my goodness.
Bereft,
oh my goodness.
career. Because I put a pin in that because Julie, you have met Putin. I just realized that. Karim, do you know this?
Actually, that's true. I read that incredible story you had written back in the day. I tried to bring it up.
No, it's fine.
It's impossible to forget, though, which tells that's great writing right there.
Yes. The one thing about him is he has so much charisma. He's not tall. He's not, I didn't find him particularly handsome, but charismatic. I mean, when he turned and he looked at me, it was just like, whoa. Oh. And it was the strangest thing, but yeah, it was bizarre. And I wasn't exactly a great representative of our country at that point. But I actually read that Yulia Berzakovich ended up working as one of his Red something, and the Red Devil team was the name of their team, but I remember she did some kind of propaganda. But it was
she did as well. She did. I think I had written something about that, but this is maybe 7-8 years ago now. I can't remember it too well.
But it seemed to be tied in with Ukraine. I thought she was born in the Ukraine, but I don't know, because she was definitely pro-Putin.
That's like when you're, being forced in those countries to do propaganda as well. So it is interesting to see, in one way, Ali, I love the way and what your thesis was about how combat sports will now, in the age of celebrity, they don't have to be bought by a dictator to distract in the old kind of sports washing. they can come in and take control and